Hello, welcome to The Sacred Journey. The Sacred Journey is the program that reminds you that life is a wonderful adventure and each and every experience we have is a unique and perfect opportunity for learning. I'm Joyce St. Germaine, and tonight's program, it's actually a question. Respiratory therapists, who are they? I have just the person that can not just explain what they are, who they are, what they do, but a lot about lung health. So I'm very, very pleased to have Peter W. Kennedy, PhD, and Peter's a registered respiratory therapist. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much.
I had to be sure to get all those words right because people think of respiratory therapists only if you have really serious problems and you need the mask and you need the tank. Do you need a respiratory therapist? But you and I came to know each other because we're both on the medical team on Hawkwing.
Correct.
We'll talk about that a little bit later. What's a respiratory therapist? Who's a respiratory therapist?
A respiratory therapist is a medical professional. They're a specialist dealing with lung diseases, respiratory health, pulmonary health, and they are direct patient care providers and get involved in respiratory issues related to the diagnosis of various respiratory diseases. Then they take it beyond just the diagnosis and they help with the treatment and assist other members of the healthcare team in putting together a treatment plan and then follow-up.
So it's not just end-of-life respiratory care or serious like COPD and emphysema.
We get involved in those as well.
But it's not only that.
Right. Yeah, we actually get involved with premature infants. Children that are born too early, their lungs aren't working. They're typically put on life support systems, which is one of the areas that we get involved in terms of monitoring and adjusting that. And we support. So someone's respiratory system, be them a premature infant or an adult or an elder who needs respiratory support and they need mechanical assistance to breathe, we will maintain them until their body improves enough so that they can take over the work of breathing themselves. But again, you get varied patient populations from premature infants. We get a lot of children with asthma, which again kind of links back to the work with Hawkwing, pneumonia, COPD, but it also gets into trauma, so automobile accidents, severe pneumonias, occupational hazards, all of that, anything that's going to affect someone's respiratory system and their lungs and cause disease and damage, we get involved in them.
And you also educate, you don't just
Absolutely.
treat. So you could talk to the population, and you do talk to the population about workplace safety, safety at home. Obviously, there are toxins around that some people work with that would need to take some respiratory precautions, I would assume.
Oh, absolutely. Education, especially with the diseases that are typically chronic, so COPD.
Explain a little bit more about that. We see it on, on commercials all the time. What is it? What does it stand for? And what is it?
Okay, it's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So basically it means that there's an obstruction in your airway. So you have difficulty in getting the air in and or out. It's usually due to inflammation and just if you scratch yourself or if you cut yourself, you get an inflammatory process. So for some reason, the lungs, which are very delicate, have been harmed and they get swelling. And that narrows the tube. So now you're trying to breathe through a much narrower tube. That makes it much more difficult. You have a overproduction of secretions, so now you have thick mucus filling the airways, and all of that really impairs a person's ability to move air in and out. And when they can't breathe, you get short of breath, and that's a very distressing feeling, and potentially it can be fatal.
Is COPD a single disease?
It's typically made up of chronic bronchitis and emphysema, which physiologically are a little bit different, and the changes that you see within the lungs are a little bit different. But basically, they are combined and determined to be obstructive lung disease. Some diseases are not necessarily obstructive, moving the air in and out, but they restrict the size of your lungs. So you can't take as deep a breath. You can get the air in and out okay, but you just can't take as deep a breath. So you have the restrictive diseases, you have the obstructive diseases, and that would be when we're involved in, say, the diagnostic component of it. That's what we're looking for. How fast can someone blow air out? How much can they blow out? And that way you can help determine whether or not they're in, the obstructive component or the restrictive, or in some cases a combined effect.
And so you could follow typically a patient, or literally from birth through their entire
Absolutely.
life till they're an
Yes.
elder.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about asthma, because
Okay.
as a former teacher, it felt to me, or it seemed to me, that every year I noticed, or maybe over the course of several years, more children with asthma than when I first started teaching. Was I imagining that?
No. There's been an increase in asthma, and as an educator, it is one of, if not the greatest cause of absenteeism among kids.
Wow.
And it goes beyond the kids, because if the kids are at home because they can't breathe, then caretaker has to be with them. So a parent, guardian, whatever, would need potentially to take a day off. It's very taxing, and as a parent, and my daughter had asthma, and as a respiratory therapist, even as a parent, it is very emotionally stressful. So now the parents are getting tired, the kid's not going to school, so it involves the whole family. But yes, we're seeing much more in the way of asthma. There's multiple theories out there in terms of exactly why this is happening. I think we had mentioned a little bit before about, sometimes people think we're too clean. Other times it's more of an immune system.
Elaborate on that, because I don't want people to go, oh, we can be dirty. We talked
Yeah.
about that not on the show, but
Yeah.
when we were prepping for the show. Too germophobic? What do you mean by too clean? Too sterile?
Usually asthma is an inflammatory reaction to some kind of an insult that the patient has been exposed to. Sometimes it's pollen, sometimes it's very strong fumes, sometimes it's an upper respiratory infection, a viral infection. And patients are typically kind of unique. I mean, there's kind of this big area of different causes, but you can take patient A and patient B, and they'll have different triggers of what sets off their asthma. The thought about the too clean is that our immune systems have not been challenged enough, so that when they do get exposed to something, they overreact. And there are a couple of studies that, kids that live on farms say, because they're always exposed to much more in the way of airborne irritants, they don't have as much allergy. Nobody knows exactly why. Sometimes it's cold air. So that's not a cleanliness issue. But it is an immune system response. And again, asthma is primarily an inflammatory process. You get swelling of the airways. That makes the smooth muscle surrounding the airways very sensitive. So then you get what they call bronchospasm, and it's like a muscle cramp, tightening the airway. So you got swelling, you got the muscle cramp, you got secretions, and it makes it very difficult to breathe.
In a home, let's say you had a child with asthma, is it appropriate to have pets or not have pets, or does it matter what types? I mean, what kinds of things can a family with a child
Depends
with asthma expect?
if the child is allergic to the pet.
Oh, so it's not a given.
It's not a given.
Okay.
For instance, my daughter was very allergic to cats. We had cats. We ended up getting rid of the cats. It didn't cure, it didn't eliminate her asthma, but it made her body less responsive to any other insults. So it would be, again, a case-by-case basis as to what is the child sensitive to. Sometimes it's food issues. Nuts can cause not only an anaphylactic shock, but they can also cause asthma, shellfish. So all of these potentially could be triggers for an asthma attack. So if you have a child, the child needs to know, and as a parent, you need to know what the child's triggers are, what causes them to go into an asthma attack. And if you know the child is going to be exposed to something, then typically you'll have medications that you can pre-medicate, which hopefully would prevent them from having an asthma episode, or at least minimize it.
When we were talking earlier to prepare for the show, you said that a lot of people don't use their inhalers correctly. I was so shocked because I thought, well, what's to use? You stick it in. From what I, expert, I've never had asthma.
That's it,
Stick it in your mouth, push the button, because that's what I see people on TV do.
Most people don't use them correctly. And some of it is there are multiple kinds of inhalers, metered dose inhalers, MDIs. And you see the little canister, and sometimes they're green, sometimes they're orange, whatever. And it's a pressurized canister that basically the individual would have available to them sometimes when they start to feel that they're having a problem. Other times it's more of a regular dosing preventative scenario.
Okay.
But kind of the more common one is a pressurized small canister, and you get it out and you shake it up. Most people will then put it in their mouth and press the canister down to activate it and generate the mist, and then start breathing in. Those units, typically by the time you start breathing in, all the medication's in the back of your throat. So they have to kind of relearn how to take it. Don't put it in your mouth, 3-4 fingers away. Start breathing in before they press down, and continue breathing in. Hold your breath for 10-15 seconds, and then exhale and wait 3 to 5 minutes before you take the second dose, which is typically the routine.
Wow, that's so different than what my perception would have been, but again, I've never been trained.
Yeah, they also have what they call spacing chambers or holding chambers that you stick the metered dose inhaler in one end of it, and it just is an extension. It's a clear plastic tube, has a mouthpiece on it. Then you can actually activate the mist and start breathing in at the same time. And you can actually take multiple breaths in through that.
Because then it takes longer for it to reach.
Yeah.
Wow, I would have never
But then
thought that.
again, there are multiple kinds of inhalers. Some of them use a liquid, like the metered dose inhalers. Some of them are dry powder, and they're very fine, granulated medication, almost like confectioner's sugar. The methodology of taking the inhaler using one of those is different. There, you have to hold it steady. You don't shake it. There's a lever that typically you would push to activate it. Then you would put that one in your mouth, and you have to inhale more rapidly than you would with the metered dose inhaler.
So this is something that a respiratory therapist would work with the patient to be sure they understood.
Yeah, and certainly respiratory therapists, this is what we're trained to do. This is our specialty area, so we're familiar with all the different kinds. We're certainly not exclusive in terms of our knowledge, but in general, as a profession, they're very good at understanding the different kinds of nebulizers and the best technique in terms of using that.
Okay, I want to talk about nebulizers in a second, but I also neglected to mention that you are the former chair of the Department of Health Sciences and Nursing, and also the former director of respiratory care programs. So you have had the responsibility of not just working with patients, but of educating other therapists and students, and we'll talk a little bit about the education that someone would need to go through if they wanted to become a respiratory therapist. But explain a little bit about nebulizers.
Nebulizers are another way to produce an aerosol medication. Other than the metered dose inhalers or the dry powder, these are units that will generate a mist for 5, 10, 15 minutes. So you're less bound to coordinating when you breathe in and when you generate the mist.
And it's still individual use? It's
still
not
individual,
in the atmosphere or the room around you?
Right, you're still using a mouthpiece for it. Some of them are actually breath activated, so you only get the mist generated when you breathe in. And they're for longer term treatments. Sometimes, again, people have trouble coordinating with a metered dose inhaler, be it liquid or dry powder. So these are more effective
and less
for those
portable,
people.
It seems.
Yeah, you need some kind of a generator compressor to produce a pressurized gas, air, to run the nebulizer. But they have those available. They're battery powered, so they can be very portable if you don't have, an outlet handy.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what the education would be. And I know you said there's 2 levels and that it might even be shifting if someone were interested in becoming a respiratory therapist.
Typically, it's college-based, and right now the way the educational programs are set up is either a 2-year program leading to an associate's degree or a 4-year baccalaureate degree as entry level. So for new people coming in, students to be a respiratory therapist. There are a couple of master's programs, but typically they are for someone who already has a respiratory background. In Connecticut, there are 5 entry-level programs, 4 of which are leading to the associate's degree, and then 1 that leads to the bachelor's degree. And then there's 1 program that actually is useful as a bridge between associates and then going back to earn their bachelor's degree.
Okay, well, at the end of our show, people will have an email to contact you, but they also will have the website of the AARC.org.
Yes,
What is that?
American Association for Respiratory Care. And it's the professional website. And you can go on there, you can find all sorts of educational opportunities. There's actually a listing of all the accredited respiratory care programs at whatever level of degree in every state. So you can go on to Connecticut and you can get a listing of all the programs. You can go on to Massachusetts and again get a listing of all the programs.
Okay, that's good to know. Now, we met through Hawkwing,
Yes.
and you're on the medical team and now on the board of directors. And on the reservation, you do health fairs, screenings, you do a lot. Walk us through a little bit about your role on the reservation, on the medical team.
I got involved basically because asthma is prevalent on the reservation, so that I went out there as an asthma educator. When I got there, I not only saw kids with asthma, but adults with asthma. We saw adults with COPD. And what I found was that many of them, regardless of what their underlying medical problems were not clear, and this is not limited to the reservation. They were not clear what their medications were. They were not clear on the best ways of taking their inhalers, and they didn't understand the disease process. So what I have now kind of evolved into at the health fairs is sitting down with people, talking about the disease, explaining what the pathology is, what is happening to their lungs typically, what medications they're on, why they're on them, because again, some of these people are on 3 or 4 different medications, and they don't understand what's this for, what's that for, and how do I take this. So that is what I'm spending most of my time on, is educating on that, how to take the nebulizers, the inhalers, correct procedure on doing those.
You had also talked about the importance as a respiratory therapist of really understanding how the heart and, is it kidneys?
Heart and kidneys.
And I thought that was so unexpected to me. I mean, it does make sense because this is connected to that and that is connected to this, but I wouldn't have thought that the mechanics of it were all that important.
Well, obviously the heart and the lungs are they're in the thorax.
When I thought about it, I went,
so that makes a lot of sense because, the heart pumps the blood through the lungs and the lungs gets rid of carbon dioxide and brings in oxygen and all that good stuff. The kidneys are important because you have in your system a normal acid-base balance in terms of chemistry. And your lungs are important in modifying that, but your kidneys are also extremely important in modifying that. So there are 2 systems that interact to make sure that your chemistry of acid and base remains constant. If your lungs start to fail to some degree, your kidneys can adapt. If your kidneys start to fail to some degree, your lungs can adapt. But as a therapist, you need to understand that whole interaction so that you can take a look at laboratory values and think, okay, this is where the main problem is, this is what's happening, and try to intervene to support what the body itself is trying to do.
Okay, when you explain it that way, I can go, aha, that makes sense. But at first, it didn't make a lot of sense. This is not something we talked about. It's just something that occurred to me. But I noticed that now people seem to be interested in doing things like meditation and Tai Chi and yoga, all of which involve the breath. I'm going to read that as a good thing because it has to do with respiratory health, at least awareness.
It certainly has a big impact on relaxing somebody,
Okay.
which is probably going to have a better impact on your cardiovascular system and your heart. Your pulse rate is going to come down, your blood pressure is going to come down if you're relaxed. From your pulmonary system, your body is going to make you breathe as much as you need to. It's not going to make you overbreathe, it's not going to make you underbreathe if everything is normal. Whether you're relaxed or not, yes, it's going to have an effect on how rapidly you breathe. If you're tense and you're real anxious, your heart's going to go up, your respiratory rates. As you relax your whole respiratory system, your breathing goes down in terms of slowing down, more shallow, kind of like when you're sleeping.
Okay, so someone who does have asthma, would they need to consult with their doctors before doing something gentle like yoga or something like that, or is that?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's nothing that you need a prescription for to take a yoga class or a meditation class. Certainly when we have asthma patients that are having an episode, we try very hard to keep them calm and quiet. And it's a lot easier to breathe slowly and deeply than rapid and shallow for someone with obstructive disease, be it COPD and bronchitis or asthma. A slow, deep breath is better, and it keeps them calmer.
Okay,
so that's very important.
If a non-professional or non-trained person came across someone that was in obvious respiratory distress, best way to handle it, let's assume 911 first of all.
Yeah.
And then?
If they have medications, and hopefully they would have someone with them that knows them. If they can take the medications themselves, then that would be the best. Or if they have, especially if you're working with children, if you have a parent there that knows how to administer the medication. But as we had said before, keeping them calm is also important. And again, having them just try to take the slower, the deeper breaths. But really the 911 obviously is crucial. And then if you have medications available that are prescribed for them, then have them administer those.
Okay, so just, I'm going to assume worst case scenario, there's no one around. And they're obviously having a hard time breathing. So either they've been diagnosed already with some kind of a breathing issue, respiratory issue, and do have meds, or this is a new thing for them, a new event, a new occurrence. But either way, 911, or if the person says, no, I have my inhaler, I can handle this, do you still call 911, or is that just still
You would still call 911.
Okay.
Especially if they are in distress. And you know, you will be able to tell when someone is in distress. You know,
wheezing?
Wheezing, you'll see neck muscle distension. You can actually see soft tissue literally being almost sucked in because they're trying so hard to inhale.
So it's really a wheezing,
911.
gasping,
Yeah,
it's an obvious.
Yeah.
Okay. We have 1 minute left, and I want to be sure that our viewers know everything they need to know about respiratory health. And in the 25 or so years I've been doing the show, I have never had a respiratory therapist on. So this is all new for me, and I thank you for coming to share your expertise. One last little thought that you want to be sure that our viewers really understand?
Well, I mean, respiratory care, it's been around for quite a while. It's still evolving. Looking at some of the employment projections for people that may be interested. The Department of Labor looks at, 25% increase in the next 15 years.
Wow.
So someone who's looking for a career, and it can be acute care, it can be pulmonary rehabilitation for long term. So there's many subspecialties within respiratory care that you can get involved in to keep you energized, and it's really a very rewarding career.
Okay, and You recently retired, I
Yes,
believe?
2 months ago.
Okay, well,
As from the
congratulations.
University of Hartford, yes.
But I know you'll still be on the medical team
Yes, because
and
I'm
you'll
still be
still be
involved in asthma
administering
education, yes.
care, education, whatever.
Yes.
But, okay. Well, we're so glad that you took time out of your schedule, your retirement schedule, to come and share your knowledge with us. It was a
Well, thank
pleasure
you.
to have you.
I
So
enjoyed
thanks
it.
for joining us on the Sacred Journey. We'll
Thank
catch
you.
you next time. Thanks, Peter.